Are you drowning in a sea of characters and plot lines and struggling to keep your series from spiraling into chaos? Maybe you're worried that this story's just a mess. Well, what if I told you that there is a simple trick to weave all of these threads together into one cohesive narrative? Welcome, Scribes, to the Extraordinary. Today, we're going beyond entertainment and diving deeper into the craft of storytelling by analyzing what makes the Lunar Chronicles such a cohesive story. Managing multiple plot lines and characters can be challenging, especially if you're deciding to tackle a series for your first major writing project. Congratulations, you just decided to make your life a little bit harder, but don't worry, I'm here to help guide you through how to do it effectively. Instead of mercilessly cutting out all of these elements, there's one way to make sure that you can weave together a cohesive narrative, and that's to use a focus anchor. So, step number one is use an anchor protagonist. The protagonist is going to be the main character, the main hero of your series, the point of view that we will be following. Your protagonist will make the most important decisions in your series. You can have multiple main heroes, many plot lines, many characters, but one protagonist. So, what does the Lunar Chronicles do really well in this? Well, Cinder is the protagonist of Cinder. Scarlet is the protagonist of her story in Scarlet. Cress of her story in Cress. And Winter of her story in Winter. But Cinder is the protagonist through everything, and everyone's character arcs, everyone's story ties back to Cinder. So Cinder is the gravitational linchpin that keeps the entirety of the Lunar Chronicles and all the plot lines and all the character arcs revolve around her. It unifies the entire story around her. Her journey and her conflicts are the central focal point of the series' overarching narrative. It provides cohesion and clarity. That's why, even if you're going to do a big series with a lot of characters, you need to have one protagonist. Even if you have dual protagonists, like especially if you're doing a romance going from one POV to the other, you're going to have one protagonist is going to prevail over the others. You can have as much screen time as each other, page time as each other, but one is going to be your protagonist. Your protagonist makes the most important decisions. Your protagonist makes the climactic final choice and action to conclude the story. One protagonist. It's your central point. And by having this one focal point, you prevent series spiral. So the tip for this section is to ensure that every character and every plot line serves to anchor to your protagonist, that it all ends up serving the main story. So keep the main story the main story. Part 2 of making sure your series is cohesive is you're going to be weaving a web one character at a time. When you introduce characters, do it gradually, especially if they're going to be main characters, especially if they're going to be point of view characters. Very important. For example, in Cinder, we get Cinder and we get Kai. And that's all that we get. We get Cinder and we get Kai. We get a little bit of doctor's name. I don't remember his name at the moment. But we get a little bit into Dr. Erland. Erland. I think it's Erland. Elend is Mistborn. Wrong series. As the series progresses, we slowly learn more characters. We get introduced to Cinder and Kai in the very beginning, and then Dr. Erland, and then Lavanna, who's the big villain. And then we get a little sprinkle of Cress at the end of Cinder. And then in Scarlet, we are introduced to Scarlet and Wolf right off the bat. And we're introduced to Thorn, who's a very fun character. They're all great characters. And then in Cress, we get to see Cress introduced and Jason introduced, and then Winter is introduced kind of towards the end. And by that point in book 4, we have our full cast of main characters ready to go. You don't want to info dump in your books. So you don't want a character dump in your books either. Don't overwhelm your audience by being like, here's the entire Avengers cast of important characters. No, even the Avengers did Iron Man, and then they did Hulk, and then they did Captain America, and then Thor. And I don't remember the order quite well because it's been almost 2 decades since those movies started coming out. Wow! Each book of the Lunar Chronicles focuses on a new prominent character, so let's take a look at that. Scarlet, in her introduction, she's trying to find and save her grandmother, but in doing so, she realizes her grandmother's whole life was dedicated to protecting Cinder. So now Scarlet is roped into protecting and helping Cinder reclaim the throne because that was her grandmother's dying wish. That's what her grandmother died trying to accomplish. So that's how Scarlet gets roped into it. Well, what about Cress? Well, Cress provides insight into the antagonist's operation, and she's able to aid in the rebellion because she has insider knowledge of how they work, how they function. I mean, honestly, Cress is like the linchpin for a lot of, well, pretty much all um the like data collection and information intelligence. She's like the linchpin of the entire intelligence agency on Luna. So her introduction showcases more of the backstory and pulls the curtain a little bit on how the villains actually operate. And Winter's contribution, well, she's been standing up to Lavanna her entire life, and she helps with the central conflict because her standing up to Lavanna, her refusing to use her powers, her showing kindness to everybody brings people to protect Winter, and they join with her, and then Cinder shows up and they're like, Winter, what do we do? Follow her? All right, let's go. So that's how all their stories come together to serve the anchor point of Cinder. Make sure that each new primary character you introduce, their goal is going to align with the main character's goal and in their journey. Jason is a great example of his goal not at all aligning with Cinder whatsoever. He doesn't want to be a part of the rebellion. He doesn't want to stir up trouble. He doesn't want to do anything. He wants to keep Winter safe. And then Winter's like, I'm going to go help my cousin. And Jason's like, guess I'm going to do that now too. It's great. He's like, I take orders from my princess. And Cinder's like, me? And he's like, you wish. So there's so many good bickery dialogue moments in these books. I've recently reread them. I feel like I want to reread them again. But introduce your characters strategically and ensure that their stories intersect meaningfully with the anchor point of your whole story, which is, say it with me now, your protagonist. Your protagonist is going to be the core of your story. Part 3 of how to make sure that your series is cohesive is world building that serves the anchor. World building that serves the protagonist. Your anchor is the protagonist. I'm going to say it until you're sick of it because you need to know that the anchor is your protagonist. There are wonderful books, series that I have read that are great. There's one series that I've read that did not have a central protagonist, and it drove me crazy, and the ending of it was just so... because there was no central protagonist. There was no one person making all the important decisions and making the final climactic decision. And the one who made the final climactic decision was arguably the one who did the least important things in the... It's a very popular series. I'm curious if you could guess which one I'm talking about. It is a sequel series. I will give you that guess if you know what I'm talking about. Write it in the comments. I want to see what your guesses are. But your world building needs to serve the anchor. World building is fun. World building is wonderful. But there's something called world building disease or world building sickness, whatever you would like to call it. And that's when you write and plan and create so many details of this vast, awesome world that you don't actually start writing the story that you're building the world around. And some people just like to world build. That's great. I'd recommend being precise with your world building. And this is what I mean is avoid creating unnecessary details that don't serve your story. If your main character is a farmer who becomes a king, you're not going to learn about the tidal wave situation and how to navigate the oceans by starlight because it's taking place all on a single continent. You're not going to learn about the minerals and what grows on the moon because they're not going to get there. See what I mean? Just don't waste your time unless you really want to and that's your jam. But if your goal is to write a book, don't waste your time writing a bunch of unnecessary details. The world building to the Lunar Chronicles is very specific to the story of Lunar Chronicles. What interesting tidbits of world building do we get in the Lunar Chronicles? Well, we get the cybernetics and being a cyborg. That's very integral to Cinder. We hear about Luna versus Earth. So Earth is a few hundred years into the future. So we have a little bit of fun of some things are familiar, some things are new. That world building isn't super dense, which is great. It's easy for us to get into the world. So what about the moon? Well, people live on the moon. Okay, why? Because the lunars are the main conflict. Great, that serves the story. What about glamour? Well, glamour is the lunars' gifts to use to manipulate people, which is something that's given to Cinder, or not given to Cinder, that she's born with, that she learned how to use. So we have that magic system is implemented by the main linchpin, Anchor, the protagonist of Cinder. So all that falls together. Well, technology. We learn a little bit about how technology works. Why? Because Cress is a hacker who ends up working for Cinder. We learn about the hierarchical system of Luna society and a bit of Earth society. Why? Because world leaders are deciding the fate of two planets, planet and a moon, two intergalactic entities. Why? Because there's war on the horizon that Cinder is trying to stop by taking the throne. Therefore, it still goes back to Cinder. Sounding like a broken record a little bit, but I hope you get my point, is all of the world building that we actually hear about in the Lunar Chronicles have to do with the main story. So when you're world building, when you're figuring out all these things, focus on what your character actually is doing and what your character needs. And if you need some help for this, there's a free resource down in the description below that specifically helps you generate world building based off of who your protagonist is and what their story is about. There's a bunch of different options and it's just something to help you get the ideas flowing. But when you're world building, keep it all anchored to your protagonist. And the final way to make sure that your series is nice and cohesive is to unite motivations. Your story, especially if you're doing a series, is going to have a lot of characters, a lot of important characters, a lot of major characters, a lot of side characters. So ensure that those characters have personal reasons to actually join the plot. Example from earlier, Jason joins the plot and he joins the team in book 4 because Winter's joining and he's like, well, I need to protect her, so now I'm involved with this. Scarlet, she wants justice for her grandmother and she wants to follow through on her grandmother's final act, which links her to Cinder's cause. Cress wants freedom from captivity, not only of hers, but also from all the other shells, which aligns with Cinder's plot. Also, she happens to really enjoy the team and find them as a family that she never got to have. Winter's motivations is survival primarily, but also she wants justice and she wants to see her people not be captive under Levana's oppressive rule. And that rebellion aligns with Cinder's rebellion. So all of your main characters' motivations. Gonna go through all the guys as well. Kai, his whole thing is, I don't want to marry Queen Levana. She's terrible and she's going to kill me and then take over the planet through ruling my empire. I don't want to do that. Well, guess what? Cinder's trying to stop Levana too, so he joins up with them. Wolf wants out of the pack. And he meets Scarlet and goes, you're my reason to get out of this. But because Scarlet is now involved in the situation, he's like, well, I guess I'm back into it, but then we're going to get out of it and go live on the farm. And it's great. And then you have Thorn. Thorn just wants money. He wants to be free. He wants to be on a ship with the Rampion and to just enjoy life. And then he realizes he can be a hero. And then he becomes loyal to the crew, and he's the captain. This is his crew, so of course he's going to take care of his crew because he's always wanted to be a captain. So now he's roped in as well. So all of these major players get roped in to Cinder's main goal and her main story. Why? Because their motivations are written in a way that they're all cohesive and funneling towards the main goal. Every single main character has their own arc. They have their own goal that they end up reaching. All of their character arcs close and tie off in a little bow, and it's wonderful. They all grow, they all change, and that's why we love all of the characters. At least I love all of the characters. Who's your favorite of the main 8? I would like to know. For me, it's Kai, and then it also keeps changing to anybody else that's on my mind because they're just so good. When you're uniting motivations, create a personal motivation for each of your main characters that end up weaving together with the anchor point of the story, who is your protagonist. So homework for you guys. If you are going to be writing a series, you need to figure out the anchor point of your series. And if you're currently waffling with who your protagonist is, make a decision. If you have a couple people who you could be your protagonist, you got to make a choice and then start working with them as the protagonist. And if they don't work, you can switch back. And that time and energy that you spent writing is not wasted. It helps you figure out what your story actually is. I remember hearing Brandon Sanderson mention he wrote an entire book or series. I don't know which one he was talking about, but he wrote an entire book, rewrote the whole thing with a completely different protagonist. And clearly it works now. So you'll never waste time as long as you're still workshopping your story. So find your anchor point, determine who your one central protagonist is, and then determine their journey, their story, their goals, their motivation. That's going to be the backbone, the linchpin, the anchor point of your story. Weave and don't dump. Weave your characters together slowly, add them to the tapestry, and introduce them, other main characters. Introduce them slowly. Don't dump your characters on your audience all at once. We don't dump world building. We don't dump characters. We want to ease your audience into it. And then make sure your world building is personal to your protagonist. If you don't know where to start with your world building, well then just ask yourself, who is your protagonist? Where do they live? What do they do? What part of society is important to them? And then, hey, look at that. You have 3-4 elements to pick from to start fleshing out. Only world build really what your protagonist interacts with. And when you randomly mention, and she picked up this Lilanian flower, someone goes, wow, they world build all the flowers out too? No. It's the iceberg effect. They see this much and this much world building, but it's actually kind of flipped when it comes to world building, which is really fun. That's a little writer secret. We don't need to tell readers about that. Although all writers are readers. Whoops. So when you're creating world building, make sure that it's personal. Make sure that all the world building aspects you're spending your time on actually matter to the protagonist and actually matter to the story. Finally, unite motivations. All of your main characters that are going to show up have a goal. Make sure that that goal somehow ties into the main character's goal. And there are ways to make this fluid. There are ways to make this feel like you're forced into it. But ultimately, if you know who your protagonist is and you know what the main story is, everything else is going to flow seamlessly into that. And if you like this video, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe. And let me know, what kind of series are you working on? I'm currently working on a YA fantasy series that's focusing on an apprehensive prince who's forced to take the throne. He doesn't want it. You know, a typical trope of like this, the younger brother tries to usurp the throne and get it. Well, I thought, what if I give it to him and he doesn't want it? So what about you? What kind of series are you working on? I would love to hear what you guys are doing down in the comments below. And my Scribes of the Extraordinary, that's all I have for you today. I look forward to our next adventure as we continue our journey of going beyond entertainment, one step at a time. And if you want to hear more about a very good series, check out these videos here.